All right, we're going to get started. We're about 5 minutes ahead of schedule. I love that. So we're going to get rocking and rolling. I know our panel is complete and it is here. So we are going to rock and roll on down our summit. Obviously, Frank is joining us back again to moderate this panel session around Zero Trust Framework. And joining Frank is Vikrant Arora. He is a CISO at CyberPoint. Vic's expertise includes establishing enterprise cybersecurity programs, creating high-performance teams, driving unprecedented risk awareness, and responding to security incidents and business continuity threats. In addition to being the virtual CISO for multiple healthcare systems, he also serves as an advisor to cybersecurity startups and is currently co-authoring a book called The AI and Cyber Handbook for Healthcare Boards. His previous roles as CISO include Hospital for Special Surgery and NYC Health Plus Hospital, the largest public health care system in the country. Joining the panel also is Leslie Berkey-Heiser, a direct trust assessor and independent healthcare consultant with over 25 years of experience. Her areas of specialty include healthcare regulations, managed healthcare, and information technology, with focus on HIPAA, cybersecurity, and privacy, including those within governmental programs and the ongoing emergence of interoperability. She serves as a board member for PrivyPlan and actively participated in the work group for electronic data interchange strategic national implementation process. And again, like I said, back with us again is Tamara Baker of Zscaler, and of course, Frank will be moderating, Frank Catita. So Tamara and Frank, if you want to join the conversation, we will. Hi, Tamara, you're back. We'll wait here just a second for Frank.
It's the hang on a second. It's let me see if I can.
Do you want me to start your video for you?
Yes, could you say I'm not? It's not letting me start it.
Let me here. Try that. There you go. All right.
Good to see you again.
Oh, a
Long
3 to 4 hour event, and we are on time. So I'm very happy about that. Thank you so much, for everyone, for being here. I'm going to go on. Going to go on mute, and you guys can get the conversation rolling.
Okay, thank you again, and good to see our panelists here. And thanks for the introductions, Carol. This is a zero trust panel, but I want to look at it as looking out there into the future and sort of what I describe as the post-zero trust world, or what that will be like. So I just like to start it off just to set the stage of we are where we are right now, and we talked a little bit about this as Tamara wrapped up the last session. Where do you see the next generation of zero trust going in sort of the futuristic sense? Vic, would you like to start?
Sure, Frank. Happy to be on the panel, and it is quite an interesting question because I think, as is most industries, and specifically healthcare, are quite far from achieving a full zero trust framework / architecture. It seems like a North Star in today's healthcare environments, where it'll take us years to get there. So it's hard to imagine what would come next. But I do trust the various research organizations, cyber startups, and marketing companies to come up with a new buzzword for sure. I think if I have to put something specifically, I think it'll be mostly on automation and orchestration. I don't have a fancy word to put on that. But again, to make sure all the security technologies can play together seamlessly and make sure that if we are eliminating trust 100% and doing real-time continuous verification, we can do it with as little user interruption as possible. It's a huge burden for security teams to do all that without interrupting user experience. So I think something along automation and orchestration will be the next, provided we get to zero trust 100% soon.
Leslie, what do you think?
I'm just nodding my head, and I know when we first prepared for this presentation today, I had said to you, well, what do you mean by zero trust, Frank, right? Because I wasn't sure, there's the zero trust architecture, and NIST has I think it's from like 2020 publication on that. We certainly have had a lot of information about this concept of you can't trust. And I think the NIST zero trust architecture is talking about not being able to trust, a user account or a certain resource or asset based on its location. But we at ENAC and Direct Trust like to use that word trust and lack of trust more broadly, and thinking about its people and process and making sure that everybody, whether it's people or third parties or your assets, that there is a constant dynamic confirmation or due diligence of making sure that data is going where it's supposed to at the right time and right place. And so I think interoperability is the next place we're going. And I'll pick back up on that when we talk a little bit later.
Okay, yeah, I've got that. Got you down for that. Tamara, would you like to expand upon what you've already said, or do you?
Yeah, I just
People
actually,
might not have been at the other session, so it's.
well, just one of the things that Leslie brought up was NIST. It's the Special Publication 800-207. Huge fan of it. Personally, I actually contributed to that. Met with Scott, Olivier, Stu, and Sean on several occasions as they were writing that. So I love that publication. It's a great reference architecture. CISA also has great guidance on it as more of a guide versus an architecture. So it's another good resource for it. But one comment that Vic said at the very end of what he was saying is when we get to zero trust and when we've completed that, I don't think we'll ever have anybody anywhere fully done with zero trust. Zero trust is never going to end. It's a continuous thing that it's a process where you can't close the book on the project. You can't just say, all right, I've done zero trust, it's done, move on. Because even if you're really advanced in it, which we do have plenty of customers at Zscaler that have really progressed through their zero trust journey. You're still never going to be at 100% because there's always going to be something more, something new, more users, another acquisition, another application, or whatever it may be that's always going to be incorporated into your zero trust. So what does it look like from post zero trust world? I think Vic said it right. Like we're so far from zero trust today that I can't. If I knew the next cool buzzword, I might get rich off of it if I could come up with that next gen zero trust buzzword of whatever that's going to be. So I don't know what it's going to look like, but I do know that what comes after zero trust, and I say after with quotes because you're never done with it, is it becomes more seamless, as we talked about in the last panel. It's a more seamless user experience to still be secured while you're trying to get your job done.
That's great. That's great. So Leslie, I'm going to get to interoperability, but before that, you were famously quoted as saying that if you were queen for a day or king for a day, you would completely restructure HIPAA as part of your first act. How do you see this repackaging from? And first of all, it might be good just for our audience to tell us just a little bit about a day in the life of Leslie, what you do. I know you work closely on the certification programs and so on, but just sort of a brief intro in my work here's what I do.
Certainly. Thanks, Frank. And it's certainly nice to present with all of you this afternoon. I'm one of the senior assessors at Direct Trust. You've also seen and heard the acronym ENAC. That's the Electronic Healthcare Network Accreditation Commission. ENAC and Direct Trust are now merged into one company. But ENAC began in 1995 and was just to provide accreditation services. ENAC and Direct Trust we do high trust assessment services. So I'm a senior assessor and I get to work with all different kinds of healthcare data exchange only entities, whether large, well-known organizations, very small mom and pop shops out of people's homes, you name it. I get to work with the same standards, HIPAA, high-tech, NIST, cybersecurity framework, 800-171, et cetera, and how it gets implemented. And so that's really why when I was asked, what would you do if you got to regulate for a day? It wasn't so much that I think I could do it better. It's that I've watched it now. Carol mentioned I was part of WEDI in the privacy security implementation of the work group for electronic data interchange. And I've since picked that role back up. And it's interesting that all these decades later, we're still looking at implementation of privacy and security, and now, of course, cybersecurity. So the thing that I would start to change is I would never have released the initial HIPAA rules as two separate, as privacy and security separate. That has always driven me crazy. Privacy with OCR, security with CMS, and the the reason it really bothers me, and every time I see something, I think, well, that's something that could have been change that entire rabbit hole. So, for example, I see so many times that organizations will say privacy and go to the lawyers or the compliance people, and they'll say security, go to the technical person. But I've heard, I don't know how many times today already, about how we should all be on offense together and how these things take a village. We need all the multidisciplinary work of each person's expertise when you have a breach. So one of the things I would have done is I would have focused on the data and released those together. I would have said, it doesn't matter to me if the data we're protecting is electronic hard copy, spoken. I want it all to be covered. I want to know how you correct it, receive it, etc. The other thing that I think has happened is we all focused on PHI, and of course we had to. The regulators, had to stay within the limitations of regulatory rulemaking processes. However, that really started us to the path of having PHI, and then we started into breach and GDPR, and we started PII. Well, now with interoperability and patient access rules, we have EHI. Well, we just need the data we're protecting and figure out one set of rules and one set of privacy rules about it would be my queen for a day rule.
Interesting. Vic, what do you think about that?
I agree with Leslie that sometimes because of the separation, the objectives are diluted. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that the data is protected and duly shared. For example, in security, there's a principle called role-based access control, meaning you should only have access to data that is in line with your role, and you should only use it for the purposes that are part of your job responsibilities. It very nicely extends to privacy as well, that users' data, when it's collected, needs to be only shared with third parties that have a business of providing it. So I think the only unique thing about privacy that may have justified its standalone existence is the whole notion around consents. So before I collect your data, I need to take your permission, and I need to disclose to you what am I gonna do with it. And if you tell me that you need to delete it, like in GDPR, I should do it. So I think privacy does allow us to keep that user connection. Otherwise, it all becomes a little bit black box. But Leslie is absolutely right that the fundamentals of accomplishing those security and privacy objectives are very much similar, if not the same.
Tamara, any thoughts?
I'll just tie all of this back a little bit into zero trust, since that's the topic of this session. And the way I would just tie all this back into zero trust is it shouldn't matter where the users are, and it shouldn't matter where the data is and or applications that are housing that data. The concept of how we're going to regulate and control and report, great, but from a technological and zero trust perspective, this is where zero trust helps. That wherever the users are and wherever the applications live, we should be able to stitch those two things together and only give the access, as Vic was just saying, to those that need it. So that's where zero trust plays a part into this, to make this all easier for everybody. And yeah, nobody really equates zero trust to easy, but when you implement zero trust, you actually make your lives easier for things like when you got to report to Leslie, hey, this is what we're doing and how we're protecting our data.
Interesting. The other part of the title of the session has the word collaborate in it. I helped with the original founding of CIO magazine, and our publisher used to talk about IT as collaborating, and he would say they also collaborate, like clobbering each other. So, which I thought was, I think we've seen it in all of our business, the fact that we have a difference between collaboration and collaboration. So Vic, from your best practices point of view, how would you characterize the collaboration that's required in order to come up with a secure enterprise system in healthcare?
Oh, I think if there's a cornerstone of a successful security program, I think it would be collaboration, because as there are so many trends where with the adoption of security as service, software as service, the businesses going out and getting all these services from service providers directly, such as Workday in the cloud or Monday.com for project management or what have you. And if the business units are not collaborating with the security team, they're pretty much on their own. We have seen terms like shadow IT come up. We have seen terms like third party risk go through the roof. And all that can really get amplified, and the risk can get amplified if there is not a strong governance structure. And governance is just a more business term for a healthy collaboration where all the business needs get vetted from a security, business, risk, legal, and all other standpoints. Assessments are performed, and then you measure risk for it. And then IT or security is not responsible for accepting that risk. At the end of the day, it's the business that's going to benefit from that service or that implementation. Business should decide what's the speed they want to drive the car at. If I have a sick kid in the car, I may not mind a speeding ticket, but that's my decision. But if I don't have an emergency, I should follow the guidelines. So the benefit of adjusting that risk needs to rest with the business, and the level and the risk severity needs to be defined by the security team. That's their expertise. They can do threat modeling, and their responsibility and obligation is go to the business and tell them how risky is a certain proposition, and that the business decides whether it's acceptable or not. That cannot happen without collaboration. If you're operating in silos, the risk tolerance cannot be defined appropriately, the policies cannot be defined appropriately, and at the end of the day, the business cannot move at the speed of its mission. So I think collaboration is extremely important, and things like governance and these other pillars help us achieve that.
We'll get into that part in a second, but I before I turn it over to Leslie and Tamara to answer the question, you raised an interesting term which I've used in my past of shadow IT, and I used it largely because the marketing department never felt that IT understood their needs, so we brought in our own people wearing our own marketing jerseys. I'm curious if Vic, in that term, and for the audience, for the panelists as well. Is there, in addition to the collaboration question, which I want to stick with, is there any signs of shadow cybersecurity where people are bringing in, they just, these people over here just don't get it, so I'm bringing in my own? Have any of you seen anything like that?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
I have not.
Okay.
Honestly, I've not seen a business or somebody outside, because as is, the resources are so tight, the timelines are so tight, the deliverables are so hard to achieve, improving patient experience, dwindling operating margin, shortage of labor costs, nursing shortages, telemedicine regulatory challenges. There are so many constraints, and to operate within that with limited budget and achieving what you need to achieve, as is, people are understaffed, under budgeted. So they don't have the bandwidth of doing I don't want to call it the right thing, because then shadow cybersecurity would not be a right thing, but I don't think they have the bandwidth. But the good thing about what comes from that is that sometimes they may discard IT, right? Hey, we don't, like exactly what you said. Hey, we're not able to, IT cannot meet our needs, so I hired my own IT guy and he or she is going to do whatever they need. But when it comes to cyber, they lean on the enterprise cyber. Which makes the enterprise cyber as the fabric that can actually connect various business units.
The central nervous system.
Yes. So I think I have not seen shadow cyber. I don't think I'll be sad to see it. It's a difficult one, but I haven't seen it, and I think
you might have heard it here first. So that's
that's the first I've heard of it. I haven't.
Well, I'm just making this up as I go along. So it's, I mean, but I mean, I think about it, and I just knew how it ran rampant in most organizations, especially between the battle of IT and marketing people. You talked about, I think it was you, Tamara, talked about that IT is regarded as the land of, we used to call it the land of slow and no. And the other folks were called the unguided missiles. So someplace in between, we get the battle.
I do have a thought on it, Frank. I think if CISOs, and because I know some of our CISO friends who are interested in product design and other things, if CISOs end up becoming chief digital or product officers, there is definitely room for shadow cyber. So that you always remain a security professional and you can't be like, I can do better than the CISO. So I think if that happens, we might see that. I just wanted to kind of put in
Well,
that.
it's sort of like
Um,
what again, I'm not going to leave the collaboration thing, but it's sort of like what we saw with our keynote speaker today, that we have doctors now that are
yeah.
cybersecurity. So I mean, this is not out of the realm. We're not going to have shadow doctors, that's for sure. I mean, people like me going in and doing the surgery, but we are seeing people that are cross-fertilizing their skills for the benefit of the organization. Leslie, you spend a lot of time out there doing these certification programs and talking to enterprises. I mean, what do you see in terms of the great ones in terms of collaboration, and on the other side, which are the ones that are miserably failures because they just can't get people to play nice together?
Well, I want to pick up from what Vic said because I agree 100% with the model where IT brings the informed information to the business and the business works with them to make the decision about the level of risk they accept. I think having the business drive the choices, but having the informed and just basic communication. It's amazing. We go back all these years, all of us have been in business, and basic communication is what is huge. And that would be, I think one of the earlier speakers, Mr. Brody, was talking about having policies and procedures. So making sure that those documents are also living and breathing documents, that what is defined as governance is actually happening in implementation. And that's really one of the things that I do is I look for policy, process, and evidence to all be tied together. But I can't say enough for the communication part. The other part that I think that we sometimes all forget, and the thing that supports me in this, I mentioned that WEDI Privacy and Security Work Group, we're doing some work now looking at the Office for Civil Rights corrective action plans. And isn't it amazing that all these years, decades later from the implementation of HIPAA, we're still seeing breaches because organizations are not doing a full risk analysis. They don't know where their data is. And so that's another thing. It's that know your data that supports your business model in all the systems and all the people that touch it and your third parties. And if you know your data, then you can make these good decisions. So my favorite model is when I see an organization that is a good communicator, they're good overall, everybody communicates well, everybody does things as teams and collaboratively. They make decisions on a routine basis looking at risk management. And everything is documented and organized. I mean, that's kind of my favorite, and I think probably the most successful. And the last thing is one of the things we always say at Direct Trust and ENAC is with cybersecurity, it's not if you're going to get attacked. It's when you get attacked, making sure that we play offense and have everything in a row, as mentioned before.
One thing that you mentioned was interesting. The new legislation that's coming out for cybersecurity, sort of what I've loosely termed the meaningful use version of cybersecurity, has in it in the bill itself says civil rights. It's considered a civil right legislation. So it's gotten to that point where this is you just need to be protected just like you would in any other kind of jurisdiction. So I think that's important. And I think it goes without saying, as in any business, if this comes from the top, if you have a CEO of a health organization that believes in cybersecurity, collaboration becomes a lot easier. So what are you seeing in there in terms of the collaborative aspects of this, Tamara?
Yeah, so I mentioned this before. Any project that you're doing, whether again it's something AI related, or modernization related, or zero trust related, when you were asking me these similar kind of questions, that's why I was saying best practice and worst practice always led back to teams that work together, right? This collaboration. So I wholeheartedly agree with Leslie. If you're not collaborating, if you're not working together, if you're siloed, you are going to have a hard time being successful. The only other thing I'll mention is we can't use cybersecurity as an afterthought, right? So as you're designing and building and modernizing and doing new things, cybersecurity's got to be a forethought, meaning I have to implement and understand, how we're going to secure these projects ahead of time, not as an afterwards, right? I'm not going to implement AI without first understanding the cyber perspective of it. I'm not going to implement, XYZ, whether it's some awesome new Da Vinci robot, right? I want to understand and make sure that that thing is cyber protected before I deploy and implement that, right? So anything that we do, that the cyber component should be a forethought, not an afterthought, because once again, I've seen another breach recently happen where they wanted to modernize, they were doing the right thing, they were modernizing infrastructure, making things better for the user experience, but they didn't implement the cyber component of it, so users had free reign access to a lot more than they should have, for that better experience and for that modernization of how the infrastructure was. And cyber unfortunately suffered, and they got hit pretty hard for that. So we want to make sure that we're always thinking about cyber ahead of time.
Vic, how much are you seeing boards becoming involved in this? Are they more, or are they taking an interest?
Definitely. They're definitely taking more interest than they have in the past. And it's, I think, largely driven by three things, in my opinion. First is the obvious increase in cybersecurity incidents, particularly ransomware, because prior to ransomware, the business interruptions were not as clear, front and center. Patient harm was not as clear as it is in the case of a ransomware incident. So as the frequency of those incidents goes up, the board gets duly notified and they feel that the organization is hurting, the bottom line is hurting, the patient is hurting. The second thing is a significant increase in technical innovation. Cloud adoption are going through the roof. There are obvious benefits of going to the cloud. Saving money is obviously not one of them, because I don't think it's inexpensive, but I think there are other business efficiencies. So board members are usually sitting on multiple company boards. So they see the benefits of adopting cloud. They see the benefits of adopting AI. They see the benefits of taking advantage of blockchain in other industries. So they're forcing the industry to take on their specific company to take on those, make those investments. And the third is the change in regulations. I mean, SEC has come up with regulations that puts clear accountability for the board to have cyber expertise at the board level, and the board needs to take an active role in cyber risk management, not just risk management, which they do anyways. So regulations, innovations, and increase in incidents like ransomware has all caused the board to get more interested in cybersecurity.
Interesting. Leslie, are you bumping into more board interactions, or I mean, in the work you do, I mean, should there be a body of knowledge for boards to become educated on this? Because like I've sit on two boards and everybody says, what are we doing with AI? What are we doing with AI? It doesn't mean that we know what they're doing with AI. It means we've got the AI washing, so everybody has to ask about it. So I mean, board members are victims of the same social media and television that everybody is. So we got to have this. We got to have this. How do we inform boards about what they should be asking for?
Excellent question. Remember, most of the organizations I work with, they vary tremendously. I mean, literally could be in a very, very small organization or a very large one that has a large active board with a number of people that are cross-pollinating other businesses. My favorite thing to say is go to the Office for Civil Rights Corrective Action Plans and take a look at those. And you'll see immediately the basic steps that people are missing from a compliance perspective. From a cybersecurity perspective, in addition to that, I follow the HHS 405D work in the healthcare cyber exchange world, where there's a lot of pollination and networking of CISOs and others talking about issues. So I think putting the board members in touch with what's happening to others, what they're doing, because it's easy to see these are basic things some organizations are doing that are setting themselves up to be open to an attack, if you will. It's very helpful, as Vic said. It's easy to find, the current cost of a breach and some of those stats. So normally I'll work with the compliance person or the C-suite people, and I'll kind of arm them with that information to take to their board.
Do the risk management insurance companies help out at all? I mean, I know they're trying to sell policies.
Another great point. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
starting to see that more and more, where cyber insurance is offered, is required in some instances, and boards are more interested in it also.
Yeah, and with my upcoming radio programs, where we're going to be talking to a data hostage negotiator. So that, I mean, they're very much involved in it. Tamara, anything to add at that point?
Yeah, I would just say I do have board discussions every now and then, and unfortunately, we just don't have enough people that are former CTOs, former CISOs, like these technologists that are in these board seats. So yes, we need to do whatever we can to inform the existing board, however much as possible. But I would love to see more boards take on these technical executives as board members. I think that would be a really great shift. And some boards have already started doing that. I have seen that happen already, but it's few and far between still today.
Okay, Leslie, go ahead.
Add to that, sorry, just to add to that, because it got me thinking as well. One of the things that I see also in working with the C-suite within organizations or their boards is that there's still this mentality of when I have to, I'll do it. And so seeing more and more of the regulations come through, seeing stories of others, seeing breaches, that is starting to grow and brew a little bit more pressure. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about interoperability, but I know moving the needle that way, or seeing some of the regulatory activity there is helping.
Well, this is a perfect time to do that. So, the drum roll. I know that was high on your list. I'll just preface it by saying, it's been said many times that interoperability isn't a technology problem. And I think when you think about it, I mean, we talk about collaboration, and one of the natural enemy of interoperability could be lack of collaboration. So you could have the best technology, whoever it is, whoever your vendor is, everything, they get all the piping to work together. And it just takes one person to say, not with my data, you don't. So I know you have strong thoughts about interoperability. So I'm very curious, after the drum roll, of what you think.
Well, so my discussion was more so where we are in interoperability, and I'll take a step back for a second, because it's got two parts to it. So you mentioned before, I work for a standard setting organization, and both ENAC, Direct Trust together have governing bodies that look at standards, and basically all healthcare data exchange. I mentioned before, HIPAA, HITECH, NIST 800-171, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, other industry standards based on our governance group, to make sure that organizations are constantly getting what the best practice is in the environment. So the ENAC accreditation piece has like 20 plus different programs, all in healthcare. So if you're a clearinghouse, you might have one, or if you're different types of entities, secure messaging delivery. Well, we're starting to see now, and taking a step back, thinking about all the ONC work in interoperability, the Office National Coordinator and the FAST work groups, et cetera. Well, once the CMS patient access rules, which I know we're in the process of continuing to implement, but once all of our actual users are using our phones and saying, I want my data and I want it now. Can you imagine how much we have to not only see this data move around endpoint to endpoint to endpoint, but it has to be accurate. It has to have, it's all back to the basic tenets of security, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But we have a problem. And I know you just started by saying interoperability isn't necessarily a systems thing, but thinking about the technology, we have a problem, because we can't wait for registration and authentication to happen the way it sometimes does now. It has to happen the way it does when APIs are used, the application programming interfaces that are basically pieces of logic that have been well vetted and used. But then that piece of logic gets picked up, and this data moves endpoint to endpoint. Might have been my phone, it might go to a gateway, it might go to an EHR, it might go to a payer. But as the request, I'm the patient, I'm saying I want my records. As it's moving, we've got to make sure that the credential of who's asking for it, why do they need it, what's important, that old-fashioned Vic said user access, we need to make sure that's still baked in. So that's where I'm going with interoperability. We've got a new technical layer, I'm going to go for a moment and go geeky just for a second and kind of delve into dynamic registration and authentication. And so those who know about how authentication works today technically, and they can think of OAuth and OpenID Connect, we now also have another layer that is becoming, it's recommended and or it's required in some instances, called UDAP, Unified Data Access Profiles, which goes on top of OpenID and OAuth and basically allows for credentials. So maybe endpoint phone app, mobile app can say, hey, I'm ENAC accredited, and it goes to the next endpoint and says, well, I'm high trust certified, and it can go to the next one so that we know these endpoints can be trusted. And of course, it all happens hyperspeed. So I said, the next thing after zero trust, and I don't mean in any way that the two are exactly the same. I mean that when we all get to where we realize we can't trust each other and we have to do due diligence on each other, people, process, devices, assets, when we can do that technically, and that's what the interoperability rules, and we're sitting right now on a brand spanking new CMS interoperability prior auth rule that hasn't even hit the Federal Register yet. As those are rolled out, I think it's really going to become commonplace. I set up my internet service provider with 3 points with my API. I expect to do this with my healthcare data. So that was my point about interoperability and how
No, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Vic, just on that note, and let me amp it up just a little bit because we have a fiduciary responsibility to say AI as much as we can in conferences like this. So let's take what Leslie says and then add a layer of AI powered interoperability for cybersecurity. That's the world of the hyphens that Frank lives in. So I'm just curious, first of all, about the interoperability comments. Secondly, when we lay AI on this, under it, within it, what's that going to mean looking forward?
Yeah, that is a loaded question. So let me break it up into pieces. I think from an interoperability standpoint, the HITECH Act that came out in the early 2000s that incentivized electronic medical record has been largely successful because almost every organization now has an EMR. We have digital patient records. But where it has caused significant challenge is the fragmented vendor landscape. So we have different EMR companies that are trying to create an entire ecosystem and trying to create a walled garden. And the easiest analogy I can think of is think of Facebook or Twitter and WhatsApp. They're creating their ecosystem. Trying to provide all the services within that ecosystem because interoperability means that they will have to rely on another service provider to provide value to the patient or the customer, which means they have to have shared revenue, and they're not doing that. So I think that's where interoperability is largely failing. The regulations set a beautiful foundation once everything is electronic, technically, and I go back to what you were saying, Frank, it's not a technology problem. It's all in the digital ecosystem, which is built on standards and protocols, and it can easily speak with each other, provided there is human and business interest to do so. So that's what I would say about interoperability. Coming to AI, I think AI is right now there's this. If you look at, I come from a telecommunications background, so I think of things in terms of signal to noise. There's a tremendous amount of noise with AI at the moment. The signal is very little. I haven't seen practical use cases other than, hey, I used AI to plan my itinerary and I was blown away by it. Oh, I had it to my email, or I was great. This is good. It's curiosity and it's like a toy, and I'm asking ChatGPT weird questions, getting different responses. It's just like my son's playing with Google Home. I'm playing with ChatGPT, and there's nothing more to it. But at the same time, I'm not discounting the potential AI has. So I think it behooves all the security leaders and business leaders and healthcare leaders to look at the technology from a use case and a problem standpoint. What use case am I going to solve with AI? Second is put clear metrics around how are you going to measure success. And these are all traditional things that we should do with all IT projects. AI is just kind of exposing the cracks or the weaknesses we have due to lack of governance. If we have clear impact assessments, if we have clear use case business alignment, it might offer a viable strategy. But if in the absence of governance, spending lots of money, time, and effort on AI could be a huge drain on any organization. That's one piece, governance. There are two unique things to AI, in my opinion. One is we normally worry about security and privacy like Leslie and I were chatting about earlier. AI brings some unique risks above and beyond security and privacy to the organization. They bring in risks that are societal in nature. You might increase health inequities. You might have unintended consequences because AI is not a software where there is a linear input or a predetermined output for a predetermined input. That relationship changes. The latest advancements, without getting too technical on it, is the generative processors, the chat GPT, the word generative in there. The biggest insight was that it was solving problems it was not designed to without training the underlying model. So the model can change the behavior. So there are unintended consequences which are not common with traditional software. So those are unique threats. And then there are unique risks that come from AI, privacy, copyrights, trying to infer intellectual property or model inversion. So it requires closing the knowledge gap and making sure that the adoption is business aligned and measured. So I know it was a long answer, but it is a complicated.
It was worth it. Tanner, want to throw something in there?
No, I fully disagree with everything that. No, I'm just kidding. It was already very thought out and very well spoken. So we're good to go.
Very well done. We have 5 minutes left. I just have one closing question, which we could probably do another conference on for 2 days. So the whole aspect of governance. So we have two of the most governance driven aspects of IT being AI and cybersecurity. So I mean, do they run in parallel? I mean, where's the center of gravity for this? I mean, how do we combine the governance of AI-driven cybersecurity? Where does that happen, Leslie? Where do you see it happen?
Oh, I was just going to say, when I think about the two of them and the areas that they do cross over, I go back to what Vic was just saying, and I approach things the same way. I'd go to my special publications and places. For example, NIST just did one on AI for a basic framework, and figure out, just break it down. What's it going to do? What are the different tools? How are they going to impact me and my data and my organization, and start to process it? So I'm kind of going with you. I'm trying to pretend, a few years ago, it was all blockchain, blockchain, blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
And I still haven't directly been affected that I know of right now with what I do in my healthcare work with blockchain. So I'm trying not to get too excited or upset. I did, though, just do some notes, and AI generated my notes for me, and it talked all about the weather, which was just a side item we had and nothing to do with the topic. So kind of says to me, know your data and approach things in a methodical way, and use your risk, and just go back to the way you do things and figure this out as we all do it together.
Interesting. Yeah, it got me confused with Tom Crenshaw. Yeah, so my golfing career was miraculous. So Vic, go ahead. Tamara, governance.
I was just going to say that where they cross, we definitely need to avoid what you talked about earlier, which was the shadow IT piece of it, in the sense that we may have some really overzealous folks in an organization that want to start implementing and using their AI technology as an example, and we got to make sure that they're not skirting the governance process to include the cyber folks, right? So that we can actually get this done in a secure way.
Great. Vic, governance?
Nothing to add. There is an interesting question in the chat, Frank, if you want to look at, but nothing to add in terms of governance above and beyond Tamara and Leslie suggested.
So somebody's asking, again, it sort of comes back from the last session. They wanted to know the difference between AI and machine learning from what the experts saw. So is there a simple differentiation that you could, Tamara, I think you brought it up in your original comments.
I mean, a simple way to put it is AI would be able to generate new outcomes without you having to put in what the potential outcomes are. So think of machine learning as, hey, if this or this happens, this is the outcome. If this or that happens, this is kind of the outcome. Whereas AI, it would be, well, we've put in all these different things, and now AI came out with like 3 other outcomes that we didn't even think of or put into it, right? So That's just a very, very
No, that's the
oversimplistic
one
way of
that's
saying it.
syncs with it. Vic, were you talking about the question about the emergences of data mesh architecture?
I was talking about the somebody had asked about the comments by AHA, American Hospital Association, on
Oh
the.
yeah.
I was
That's been a
wondering.
controversy. So, did you have a comment about that?
No, I want to hear what the group has to say. I can definitely chime in, but
Leslie, American Hospital Association, as it relates to cybersecurity?
I'm the one place I always go to and look for comments. So
Yeah. As I understood, there's some kind of controversy. And the
yeah.
other request on the chat was that they wanted the directory of all the terms that Leslie came up with, which is fantastic. I mean, it was,
acronyms. Sorry, I'll follow up with
no,
some.
that's good. It's good. So I mean, and they were great. I think a lot of
405B,
us know them,
yes.
but it's alphabet soup. So it's for some of us like, oh my God, there's 5 new ones that I hadn't heard, and I got to go back and study. So we pretty much hit the limit on our time here. It was very insightful, just a lot of fun to be with you guys, and hope we get to work together again.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you
having
all.
us.
Take care now.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all. Thank you all. Appreciate your time. Really do. It was great.